The shift of any wartime front lines displaces populations. Pathetic images of civilians, old and young, male and female, pushing their meagre belongings along a road as old as war itself. What may happen if Ukraine falls? What could we expect? As tensions in the international situation rise, how will this affect the uprooted? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
February 24th goes down in history books as the day when Russia unleashed its invasion of Ukraine, this time without Little Green Man and without hiding its intentions. The defense ministry in Kyiv informs the public that from the early morning hours Ukraine has been seeing missile and air attacks across the whole territory. Russian missiles target airports, harbors, power plants, air defense systems, command centers, supply depots and other critical infrastructure. Early reports mention hundreds of fatalities. Thousands of Russian soldiers pour into the country from multiple directions, carried by land, air and sea. Key offensives push along four main lines. From the territory of Belarus towards Kyiv, from the south originating in Crimea, from the southeast aiming at the cities of Luhansk and Donbas regions, and from the east toward Kharkiv. It is immediately apparent that Russia's main objectives include capturing Kyiv and creating a land corridor from Donetsk to Crimea. In his address to the nation, President Zelenskyy declares martial law and appeals to the Ukrainian people to remain calm and stay home. Reports from across the country, however, say that Russian missiles are hitting residential areas. Thousands flee and head west. As pictures from Kyiv show the scale of the exodus, more than 100,000 people leave their homes that day. In total, over 6 million refugees have fled Ukraine, while an estimated 8 million others were displaced within the country itself by late May 2022. This crisis has led to approximately 1/4 of Ukraine's total population leaving their homes. Now, more than 2 years later, the situation has somewhat settled, but with renewed Russian offensive in Kharkiv and Donetsk, questions arise whether a new migration crisis is imminent should Russia break the front.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Dr. Marcin Zaborowski. He's the Policy Director of the Future of Security Programme at GLOBSEC. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. It's 1945. Europe is awash with displaced persons, refugees, asylum seekers, prisoners of war, all that, millions and millions of people roaming around looking for a home. Does that prospect of this repeating itself on our Ukrainian borders, how does that affect you? Can you foresee that such an eventuality again in Europe?
Well, I think comparison with 1945 is is a little bit exaggerated, of course. I think intentionally. Because after all, in 1945, Europe was in absolute ruin and devastation and starvation and total uncertainty. But at the same time, yes, it's true. I mean, this is for the first time since the Second World War, since 1945, we have war in Europe. Tanks are rolling on the streets. Artillery is bombing. The aircrafts are flying over. So indeed, this is the closest to what we can imagine 1945 looking like. And when we, especially in 2022, when we, in that very cold February, when we saw thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees arriving mostly in Poland at this point in time.
A couple of million.
It did look like images from what we can see, some black and white pictures from 1945. So that particular moment when everything was so uncertain, where it was unclear whether Ukraine would be able to hold its guard, is reminiscing of 1945, and we cannot exclude the possibility of that repeating itself in the next few months even.
Yes. When I come from a refugee family, my parents came over after the Second World War as part of this flotsam and jetsam of Europe. And we had this Polish at home, English in at school. Is this a problem for a refugee family with their children? Where do they assimilate? Because they tend to end up as in Mickiewicz's words, unwanted guests in a host community.
Well, that's probably one of the reasons why Ukrainian refugees tend to choose Poland as their preferred home. Yeah. There's the largest number of Ukrainian refugees actually decided to stay in Poland, at least for the time being, because of the both linguistic and cultural proximity. Language is very similar. Culture is not manifestly different. The food is also comparable. So I think that this sense of alienation that the Polish refugees must have encountered, like your parents in the 1940s.
Food and the climate.
Food and the climate, and you know, very different routine, completely different breakfasts. All these things were shocking, probably. So the Ukrainians don't have that. I mean, when they come here, they have the comfort of something which is different from home, but not awfully different. Poland is a sort of is a country which is more economically developed and so on. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a comparable both culture and very similar language.
There's a large wave of goodwill towards Ukrainian refugees. After 2 years, after 3 years, after 5 years, for example, how do these are the pressures between the two communities? Is this a general thing I'm asking, or are the pressures on social services, houses, all that stuff? Does that begin to manifest itself in hostility between a refugee community and a host community, generally speaking?
Well, I would say the initial enthusiasm that we had here in the first months of the war has certainly been declining in recent months. I mean, there is no denying of that. And the recent data published by the European Council on Foreign Relations shows that in Poland and Romania, two countries which took a lot of refugees, that support has been most rapidly declining. So now about 35 to 40% of Poles see the arrival of refugees as a threat to their economic position and to their country. And I mean, that's absolutely natural, I would say, because it does put a strain on social services, does put a strain on education, on healthcare. It represents also a lot of opportunities and for business, for example, a potential investment also, because, for example, some of Ukrainian oligarchs have now decided to invest in Poland, like, for example, Mr. Akhmetov. So it's a mixed bag. Yeah? Like as usually, the people who don't do fantastically well in the social economic circumstances are most affected by the change like that. Yes. And those people are probably most afraid.
Yes. The one aspect, there's a recent flashpoint between Ukraine and Poland is the repatriation of conscripts or draft dodgers, however you call them, men of military age who wish to escape the war. They've found themselves here in Poland, and they risk losing their diplomatic status as Ukrainian citizens. Does that produces a very enormous stress on the Polish authorities? Do we repatriate these people back to Ukraine, or do we treat them as illegals? There are parallels between a Ukrainian citizen now and Polish citizen in 1947 who refused British passport, and they faced imprisonment because they were the recalcitrant class. How do you see that affecting Polish society in particular?
This is a new phenomenon because this is a new policy of the Ukrainian state, which is in let's make it clear, in a very dire situation. Ukraine is lacking both arms, ammunition, essential weapons, but also people. People to actually willing go and fight, which again is also understandable, because after over 2 years of war, society is tired, is traumatized. Not everybody believes in success, and some people want to, well, find an easier route. I'm not sure whether there will be an effective pressure on the Polish state to actually repatriate these people who are draft dodgers, but I understand the need of the Ukrainian side to do whatever possible in their power to provide armed forces with the necessary human resources. And I think that the Polish authorities will probably have similar view of that, but at the same time, I don't think that they will be willing to, I don't know, break, human rights, yes, for example, and in the process. Yeah?
Moving on to how the family unit copes. It tends to be a nuclear family, such as my own, for example. Just the children, no grandparents, or the grandparents live elsewhere, and the child being brought up in the host community is faced with 2 languages, 2 cultures, 2 sets of different mentalities in some way. You yourself found that with living in Britain. How did the children cope with that kind of situation?
Children adapt. Yeah. Children really fantastically adapt. I mean, my ex-wife is British. I'm obviously not. And that was, for our youngest daughter, it was very natural to turn to mom and speak in English, turn to dad and speak in Polish. And they would not think about it. And I remember when my daughter, when she was about 5 or 6 years old, and we all went on holidays to Greece, and being in Greece, I had to speak English more, and also with other people. And then she looked at me at amazement and she said, "Dad, you can speak English." Yeah? I mean, it just didn't enter into her paradigm, into her way of thinking that that was something which I would be doing on regular basis, because we were living in Poland at the time, and she thought that Poland, Polish language, and that's what her brain adapted to. But then, at the same time, talking to her mom, her brain would adapt to a different thing. Yes. So, and it does pose some issues, but there is more richness in that than problems and issues, I would say.
Yes, I mean, in my case, home was Polish. Everything was in the Polish language. My education was British or English, and certainly English was the dominant language, despite the emotional the contact was in Polish, but English was the dominant. Final question: is this? Do you expect, in the short term, the numbers to rise, or the numbers to stabilise? This certainly depends on the situation in the front.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it just totally depends on what's going to happen with the war. I think the vast majority of Ukrainians who are here now, they are not planning yet to settle here forever. And many of them actually go very often and be back and forth.
Yes,
they see their parents, grandparents, friends, and their social networks are there, not here. So I think that their preferred choice would be that there is a peace, they can go home, and they can do their living there back in Ukraine. But of course, if the situation on the front becomes dramatic, then these people will simply make different calculations.
Unfortunately, we have to wind up the conversation, but thank you very much, Dr. Zaborowski, for coming on to our programme.
Thank you.
Great to have you. That's all we have time for today. Join us next time for How We Got Here.